Well, good morning. My name is Nathan. I'm the community pastor here at Salt, and let me be the first to say Happy Star Wars Day to everyone. I think Jesus would definitely want me to wish you a happy May 4th, so May the 4th be with you. And believe it or not, that's not what we're going to be talking about too much this morning, which I think is, yeah. So if you're anything like me, you can't really remember what you had for breakfast this morning. So a reminder to everyone that we started a new series last week on the book of Ruth. So we are in our second week of a 4-week series on the book of Ruth. And I was in kids last week, and so I wasn't here for Heather's message, but I did listen to it, and apparently she implied that I was going to be filling in all the background information on Ruth because I'm the one who chose the book for us to cover this year, and so that means, I know the story really well, and so that's why, she wants me to fill in all the background. But let me kind of, let you in a little bit behind the curtain as to how some things go down at Salt. So Heather and I, we choose what books of the Bible we're going to cover each year. We usually kind of, towards the end of the year, we kind of just, okay, what are we going to cover here, the next year? And here's what we do. So this past time we met about mid-December for about an hour, and we had the list of all the books we've kind of covered over the last 2 years, and then we opened up our Bibles and looked at the table of contents, and like, what books should we cover this year? And at one point when we were, picking and choosing, I said, I like Ruth, maybe we should cover that. And so it got added to the series for 2025, and I guess me saying that is what makes me the expert on the book of Ruth. So, that expertise that I obviously have in the book of Ruth, that leads me to tell you that it's a book in the Old Testament. So that's, where the expertise kind of goes. But, as Heather said last week, the book of Ruth, it's a personal story. It's a narrative, but it's a personal story about a woman, you guessed it, named Ruth, and her mother-in-law, Naomi. And the beginning of Ruth, it covers the challenges that these two women faced after losing Naomi's husband and her 2 sons, one of whom was the husband of Ruth. And go figure, in this time in our world's history, 2 women who have no men in their lives, they didn't exactly have it easy. And chapter 1, it ends with Naomi begging Ruth to go back to her family so she can find another husband and have a chance at a good life. But Ruth wouldn't have it, so she stays with her mother-in-law, and they return to Bethlehem, where Naomi's from. And so what we have here is we have 2 widows in the middle of like a buddy adventure story. Not sure that this one would have been greenlit by, a movie studio trying to get their next blockbuster. Netflix still might have picked it up because they pick up everything, just trying different things, so who knows. But that's where we begin today. So they're back at Bethlehem, and, they're trying to figure some things out. So I'm going to read all of chapter 2 so we can take in this whole part of the story in its entirety. So Ruth chapter 2. Now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side, a man of standing from the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz, and Elimelech was Naomi's husband, remember. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor. Naomi said to her, go ahead, my daughter. So she went out, entered the field, and began to glean behind the harvesters. As it turned out, she was working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. Just then Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. The Lord be with you. The Lord bless you, they answered. Boaz asked the overseer of his harvesters, who does that young woman belong to? The overseer replied, she is the Moabite who came back from Moab with Naomi. She said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters. She came into the field and has remained here from morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter. So Boaz said to Ruth, my daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with the women who work for me. Watch the field where the men are harvesting, and follow along after the women. I have told the men not to lay a hand on you. And whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled. At this, she bowed down with her face to the ground. She asked him, why have I found such favor in your eyes, that you notice me, a foreigner? Boaz replied, I've been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. May I continue to find favor in your eyes, my lord, she said. You have put me at ease by speaking kindly to your servant, though I do not deserve to have the standing of one of your servants." At mealtime, Boaz said to her, "Come over here. Have some bread and dip it in the wine vinegar." When she sat down with the harvesters, he offered her some roasted grain. She ate all she wanted and had some left over. As she got up to glean, Boaz gave orders to his men. "Let her gather among the sheaves, and don't reprimand her. Even pull out some of the stalks for her from the bundles, and leave them for her to pick up, and don't rebuke her." So Ruth gleaned in the field until evening. Then she threshed the barley she had gathered, and it amounted to about an ephah, which is apparently like 30 pounds or something like that, from what we think we know from that unit of measurement. She carried it back to town, and her mother-in-law saw how much she had gathered. Ruth also brought out and gave her what she had left over after she had eaten enough. Her mother-in-law asked her, "Where did you glean today? Where did you work? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." Then Ruth told her mother-in-law about the one at whose place she had been working. "The name of the man I worked with today is Boaz," she said. "The Lord bless him," Naomi said to her daughter-in-law. "He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead." She added, "That man is our close relative. He is one of our guardian redeemers." Then Ruth the Moabite said, "He even said to me, 'Stay with my workers until they finish harvesting all my grain.'" Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, "It will be good for you, my daughter, to go with the women who work for him, because in someone else's field you might be harmed." So Ruth stayed close to the women of Boaz to glean until the barley and wheat harvest were finished, and she lived with her mother-in-law. Okay, so there's definitely some things to unpack here, so we can kind of understand some of the significance of this story and kind of what's happening here. So this chapter, it starts out with Ruth asking Naomi, or really asking her, but kind of telling her, "Please let me go to the field and glean the heads of grain after him in whose sight I may find favor." So what's that about? Well, remember, these two women, they just arrived in Bethlehem, where Naomi is from. And yes, Naomi had family there. And the text tells us in the previous chapter that the whole town was stirred by their arrival. But they still had no men to take care of them, so they really had no place in any sort of like social hierarchy at the time. And have you ever returned to a place that you used to live, or at least maybe you spent a lot of time there before, but maybe it's been a long time since you were last there? I don't know about any of you, but for me, it's always a little bit weird when you go back. It feels, familiar, and yet somehow, a little foreign, because some things have definitely changed, while other things have stood the test of time and they're still there. And I get this feeling every time I go back to my hometown in Columbus, Ohio. I know my way around. Every turn kind of feels familiar, but there's new buildings where there was once just empty land, which I know for us living in San Diego in the year of our Lord 2025, empty land is a foreign concept, but believe me, there's places in our country, there's land, and then they put new buildings on it. So that's what happens there. But when I'm back in Columbus, there's also places where, it might be like an old restaurant that you're sure would have gone out of business by then, because there's no way they are continuing to pass health inspections, but they're still there somehow. Maybe they're doing some shady stuff on the side, who knows? But then there's, this cute mom and pop shop that you were positive would still be around, and yet they closed down. And so, you don't really, there's some things that are going on that you know, and some things you don't know. And whenever I go back to my hometown, for me, it's also a little bit strange going to the church that I grew up in. I mean, I love the place. It's the place where I first came to know Jesus really well. I'm still in contact with my old youth director, and I love it when I get to see him and his family. And there's some other people that I recognize, and it's fun to say hello to them. But there's also a lot of other people who know me, and yet I don't really know who they are, and I'm not sure I ever really did know them. But this is a church where my dad was the pastor for the better part of 40 years. And so whether or not I know them, they think they know me. And at least they know of me, and they know about me. And I'm getting a head nod from another PK in the room here. But in my mind, I'm like, have we ever really even spoken to each other before? Who are you again? I don't really know you. So is that the same thing that Naomi's getting when she's going back to Bethlehem? I don't know, but she left an untold number of years ago with her husband and her two sons. She now returns with no husband, no sons, and with a Moabite woman who no one has any connection with. And it's this Moabite woman, Ruth, who asks Naomi if she can go to the fields to pick up the leftover grain that's left behind. And this is a simple request with a simple goal. They needed food. They needed to eat. And so this would be a way for Ruth to go and get that for them, to get some grain that she could hopefully make into like some bread or something else. But why did Ruth say she was going to go to the fields and pick up any grain that was left behind? So I want us to go back a few books of the Bible to the book of Leviticus, which I know is everyone's favorite book of the Bible, right? Where there's lots of laws and regulations and all sorts of other things. So we're going to read Leviticus 19, verses 9 and 10. When you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Do not go over your vineyard a second time, or pick up the grapes that have fallen. Leave them for the poor and the foreigner. I am the Lord your God. So this is God's command to people to, maybe not be so thorough when you're harvesting your grain and your other crops. And why? It's so the poor and so the foreigner, they could have something left behind for them. I mean, this was an early social assistance program that God had commanded. It was a way just to help the poor, and it was a way to help the poor while allowing them to maintain some dignity, because they still had to go out to the fields and get the leftover grain themselves and pick it up. And I want to show a picture kind of a grain field, kind of what Ruth was dealing with here. So, here's kind of what Ruth was going after. And so, maybe she'd get the whole stalk of grain with everything there, but probably not. When the harvesters were going, they would harvest the entire piece of grain. She was just hoping for, little bits of the head of the grain that she would, pick up the little kernels off the ground, and just a little bit at a time, little bit at a time, little bit at a time. She was, hoping to get enough, but, either way, she was hoping she'd at least be able to get enough that she could make a meal for her and Naomi at the end of the day. But what happens in our story? Well, Ruth, a foreigner, she has shown an incredible kindness by the owner of the field, the man named Boaz. And he not only makes her feel welcomed by, one, talking to her in the first place like an actual human being, and two, telling her that she should come back to his field to glean from there, but he also makes her feel safe because he told the men that were harvesting there, to not harm her. They weren't allowed to lay a hand on her. And Ruth did nothing to earn this kindness, or she didn't earn it. She didn't deserve this kindness. And let's be clear that Boaz's actions, they were not something that would have been normal. He acknowledged this woman, this foreign woman, first of all. So that's very atypical then. And yes, it seemed like Naomi coming back to Bethlehem and bringing with her her widowed daughter-in-law was kind of the talk of the town. So, maybe Boaz was just curious. But Boaz didn't have to do anything. But here's the thing. God is pleased by simple acts of kindness toward others. And I want you all to think for a moment. What's the nicest thing you've ever done for someone? Or maybe that's too big of a question. So think, what is a simple act of kindness that you've shown someone else? Think about one for a moment. What did you do? How did it make you feel? Yes, being kind to another person and showing them a tangible thing that, kind of makes them remember that kindness you showed them. It's obviously a good thing to do for another person. But it also feels good to do it, doesn't it? And is it okay to feel good about doing something for someone else? Of course it is. I mean, hopefully we show them kindness just because that's the right thing to do, but I'll gladly take the warm, fuzzy feeling I get on the inside for doing it as an added bonus. And I said earlier that, maybe Boaz was just kind of curious about Ruth, but it says right there in the text that Boaz knew about Ruth. So I want to read chapter 2, verses 11 and 12 again. Boaz replied, "I've been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." Again, word had spread. It was unusual for a young widow to stay with her mother-in-law rather than figuring out how to find another husband. It's what people usually did. If you're a young woman and your husband dies, your whole point, your whole goal is to find another husband that you can, have a family with and that can take care of you. So Ruth traveling to Bethlehem with Naomi, this wasn't something that happened every day. And Boaz recognized the sacrifice that Ruth had made for Naomi and for the devotion that Ruth showed her. He recognized her. And it doesn't happen all the time, but other people do notice what we do. The phrase that exists, actions speak louder than words, it exists for a reason, and people know it for a reason, especially when it's pretty obvious that your actions aren't there just to get attention. I mean, Ruth, she didn't leave her family behind so that she could, go document this all on TikTok and try to get more followers. I mean, she went back because she loved her mother-in-law and she wanted to help her figure out how to, get by after the death of her husband and her 2 sons. And when others heard about what she had done, word spread. And now, of course, other people, they don't always see what's done behind the scenes, and that's okay. God always sees the good that you do when no one else is watching. God cares about our actions, and God cares about how we treat others. We are commanded to love him, and we are commanded to love others, and that's exactly what Boaz is doing when he showed Ruth kindness. He did it because it's the right thing to do, and sometimes that's enough. And I'm pretty sure that Boaz didn't show Ruth kindness because he was trying to impress anyone watching him. I mean, early in this chapter, we read that Boaz, he greets the harvesters that are around him. He says, "The Lord be with you." And they reply to him, "The Lord bless you." And it's possible this was just a colloquial kind of greeting between the two of them. But it's more likely that these workers, they respected and appreciated Boaz. He hired them to work in his field, and he treated them with respect and dignity, so they appreciated and honored him in return. Your character matters, and Boaz was clearly a person of high character. He owed Ruth nothing, and yet he went out of his way to make sure that she was taken care of. I mean, did he just notice a beautiful young woman in his field, and that's why? I mean, possibly, but for a man of Boaz's stature, it's not like he was going to have a hard time attracting eligible young women if he needed to. And for me, like a story like this, and reading a story like this and kind of studying it, it's important for me, and I think it's important for a lot of people. And it's important on a few different levels. I mean, last week, Heather talked a lot about her tough childhood, and I'm not going to rehash any of what she said because that's her story. But if you missed it, please go online and check out her sermon and kind of what she went through and what her childhood was like. For me, I mean, I was fortunate enough to have a really good childhood and a really good upbringing. It never feels easy when you're a kid and you're going through it and you're in the middle of, growing up. But looking back, I had it really good. I had and I still have 2 loving parents. We didn't have a lot of excess, but, I never worried or wondered if we were going to have dinner that night. There was always food on the table. We had enough extra that my siblings and I, we could, do sports and other extracurricular activities. I didn't realize it at the time how lucky I was and how lucky I still am. But it's stories like Ruth that help me today to look back and be really grateful for what God had given me. I mean, today, yes, I do work hard and I do my best to work on being the man that God is trying to make me. And, I try to be good to my family, to my friends, to my coworkers, to SALT. But I also had a really nice head start. And I didn't have to struggle through, life-altering questions like, what would happen if my family died and where would I go or what would I do if my family totally fails me? Like, those weren't questions I had to worry about and struggle with as a kid. But with the story of Ruth, we don't really know anything about her upbringing, but I think it's safe to say that she didn't really predict and plan for losing her husband and becoming a widow. She didn't really, think that's what was going to come next. And sometimes it's tough to understand what it's like for those who grow up differently or for those who go through life experiences that are different than our own. And that's why hearing stories like this are important, so we can actually get a better background of what it's like for, people who might have experiences that are different than us, or if you have experiences that are similar to this to, commiserate with somebody who's gone through some similar things. But no matter our background, and no matter where we've been or where we've come from, God sees us all the same, and God loves us all the same. And there's nothing that we can do or say, or that we can not do or not say that's going to change that. And stories like Ruth, they help us see the world as it actually is, instead of the world that we wish it was all the time. And I know that you all came here, for a really uplifting message telling you that the world isn't always awesome, that life is often hard, and life is often full of disappointment and heartache. I know that's the message we all want to hear this morning. But there's a lot of people in this world right now that they're acting in a way that's pretty much the opposite of what Jesus preached on. And I hate to break it to everyone, but if you look back throughout history, it's not like this is something new. This has been going on forever. And it still breaks God's heart when people are horrible to one another, and when people are hurting and questioning if He even exists and if they're really loved by Him more than they could possibly imagine. But there's also people like Ruth and Boaz in this world. And I have been fortunate in my life to come across a number of Ruths and Boazes. My high school soccer coach, Dave Stewart, he helped me fall in love with the game again. After multiple coaches prior to him kind of screwed me over and showed me just how ruthless youth sports can be, but he stepped in and he just coached me. I don't know that he consciously did anything on purpose that, was trying to be extra kind or considerate, but he just helped me love playing the game just to play it. I mean, he was supportive and he was fair. I mean, he was tough on me, sure, because he's a coach and he wanted me to improve. But everything he did was to try to just make me a better player and a better human being. My 5th grade teacher, Mrs. Fenner, she was kind to every student that she came across, whether she knew that student well or whether they were in her class or not. She encouraged me to write. She encouraged me to write short stories, poems, really mundane, boring geographical reports on like U.S. cities that I don't know why I did, just because. But she was encouraging. And as a 5th grader, I know that my writing wasn't really stellar. I don't think I was the best writer. And she still read things, and she still read it all, and she encouraged me. And her kindness, it encouraged me to keep doing it, which gave me the confidence I needed to, write term papers later in high school and college, and to just keep on getting better and, write things that might not be as exciting as, 5th grade poetry, but it just made me have the confidence to just keep on pursuing it and keep on doing it. And most of the part of the story that we read in chapter 2 here this morning, it's the dialogue between these two people, between Ruth and Boaz, and just showing their kindness to one another. And the conversation that we read about, it's not a continuous conversation, but snippets of conversation that they would have had throughout the day. It's Boaz continuing to show Ruth kindness, and mostly in response, again, to hearing about the kindness that Ruth had shown Naomi. Ruth then, when she gets home, she goes and she shows Naomi the haul that she has. Again, she got an ephah, whatever an ephah is, of grain. And Naomi is, not surprisingly, she's excited and maybe a little bit confused about how Ruth had been able to bring so much home. I mean, remember that Ruth had set out that morning, hoping to glean enough of the heads of grain that were left on the ground that maybe she could have enough to make something for them to eat. And I think it's safe to say that Ruth came home with a bit more than Naomi was expecting, maybe even more than in her wildest dreams she was expecting. That's why Naomi asks her, and you can almost hear her tone. She's like, "Where did you glean today? Where did you work? Basically, whatever you did, keep on doing it because it's working." But when Ruth tells her about Boaz, Naomi, she recognizes the name and she knows who Ruth is talking about. She says that Boaz is a close relative and one of their guardian redeemers, or a more traditional term that some people have used over the years is a kinsman redeemer. So a guardian redeemer is this. A guardian redeemer is a close relative who is responsible for protecting the interests of needy family members of the extended family. And I think it's safe to say that Naomi, and by extension Ruth, they would definitely qualify as being needy family members, wouldn't they? And depending on the circumstances, guardian redeemers, they would help with a number of different types of needs of the family. A very common one is they might help provide an heir to a brother who had died. So a brother dies and they would help provide an heir to that brother before they had any kids. A guardian redeemer, they might help redeem the land that someone had to sell because they were too poor to afford food or anything else. They sell their land to somebody outside the family. And a guardian redeemer will try to come back in and get that land back into the family name. They might need to redeem a family member that's been sold into slavery, or they might need to avenge a family member who had been killed. And spoiler alert, but Boaz, later in the story, he's going to play a big role as part of the guardian redeemer for Naomi and Ruth. And I'm sure he had no idea what he was getting into when he showed kindness to a Moabite woman that he had heard about when she came into his field. He was simply showing kindness to the woman that he had heard sacrificed a lot to support his mother-in-law. But that's kind of how kindness works out sometimes, isn't it? We don't really know the impact of our actions, especially our impacts to strangers and foreigners and people who might not feel like they belong or might not look like they belong on the outside. Sometimes we get to see the impact of our actions if we know the person well or if we stay in contact with them. But even then, it's very possible and maybe even likely that we're not going to see the full impact that we have on others when we show them just a little bit of kindness. And I don't think I'm going out on a limb here when I say that God is pleased when we treat others well. And not just the people that we like, but all people. I want to read you what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 5. I'm going to read verses 46 and 47. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that? Yes, we are to love all people, period. You don't need to like all the people, and you don't need to agree with them. You don't need to think that when they're doing something awful that their actions are acceptable, when they're clearly in the wrong, but treat people with dignity and respect. Show kindness to people when they need it, even if they don't deserve it. We should all strive to live our lives in a way that represents God well to others. My hope for us all is that we can just be a little bit more like Ruth, that we can be a little bit more like Boaz. Find ways to be kind to one another and to love one another well, because that's exactly what God does for us and what he expects and hopes for us as well. Would you pray with me?